Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today to interview award-winning filmmaker Maria Finitzo and award-winning author and researcher Lisa Diamond about the amazing documentary I've had the opportunity to recently view called Dilemma of Desire. So thank you so much for being here today, and I'm thrilled that this is a part of the film festival.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Well, let's just get started. I was wondering, Maria, what led you to make this film? This is not the first film you've made about gender.
So after I finished a film called In the Game, which was about race, class, and gender and how it impacts life opportunities, I was looking for my next subject, which always happens. And I read a book called The Science of Female Sexual Desire, What Do Women Want? By an author named Daniel Bergner. And I thought that was interesting that a man was writing that book, but we'll put that aside for a moment. But anyway, he's a very good journalist, and he went around the country and in Canada, I believe, interviewing scientists who were actually studying sexual desire and arousal with women as subjects, which in itself was unusual, right? And at the end of the book, the upshot of the book was women have as robust a sex drive as men. They're simply told lies about it to reinforce patriarchal structures. And so I'm not particularly, I'm interested in science, but I didn't want to make a science film. What interested me was how I think this was back in 2011, we were still, dealing with a landscape that felt a lot like the 1950s. And so for a while, I optioned the book to turn it into a documentary film, and then I let the option go and started figuring out how I would make this topic cinematic. And in my research, I came across Lisa's work and also Sophia Wallace. And what was most interesting to me was, okay, here's this information that women have now. We have as robust a sex drive as men. That's really, really great for us to know. Now, what are we supposed to do with that information when there's still so much that gets in the way of us behaving and however we want to behave, whatever our desire is, acting on that desire and having agency over it. And so that, as a filmmaker, was what interested me most, was the stopgap, why are we still in the same boat we were in when I was in 8th grade, right? And I have a daughter, and she's 30 years old, and I noticed when I was researching the film or had watching her grow up, that the landscape that she was growing up on, while it might have told her she had the freedom to behave however she wanted, that was in fact not necessarily true, because girls were still being punished and shamed and mocked for acting on their desires. And so that was really my motivation for wanting to make this film.
That's interesting. And that provides some clarity to me about how you named the film. Because as I watched it, I kept seeing it about pleasure and emancipation and the clitoris. So there were many different things you could have called the film. But is that basically how you came to the dilemma of desire?
Yes, I mean, as human beings, we have this capacity for arousal and desire and whatever else it is. And yet, instead of just being able to act upon what is a natural part of our humanity, we have all these things in the way that stop us from doing that. And so it's almost like, well, what good is it to have like as robust a sex drive as men if in fact we can't access that in a way that feels right for us? So that was the dilemma. And I got a lot of pushback on the title. People didn't like it.
Interesting. How did you come to meet all of the people in the film, and how did you get connected with Lisa?
So in doing the research, Lisa's work came up right away, and I'm not even, it's been a while since I read Daniel Bergner's book. Are you in his book?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. So she was in his book. And then, when I was looking for other people, other sort of experts, I found Sophia Wallace, and then Sophia Wallace brought me to Stacey Dutton. And then it took a couple of years before we found T. Chang. And so when you started film, the way I make films, in order to make this topic, it was going to be an essay about women's equality as it relates to how we're treated as sexual beings, right? you have to find people who are working in that space and doing interesting work. That's the first thing, because you ask questions, and I need the people who are actually in the space to help me answer those questions. And so that's how my four, we call them experts, but they're not really experts. I don't treat any of them like talking head experts. They're hopefully realized human beings, right? That's how I found them first. And then as the film was evolving, I got some feedback that it would be important to include the voices of, just call them everyday women, right? Women who are not, people who are not working in the space of studying sexual desire. Because Lisa, Stacy, T. Chang, and Sophia all speak easily about this topic, right? They don't have a hard time saying the word clitoris. They have a language for understanding what's going on, but a lot of women do not. And so what I really wanted to do was find out what it was like for women walking around who weren't right in the midst of this topic. And also my hunch was that the work of these women that I was focusing on would resonate in the lives of the women you were going to meet in real life ways. And that is essentially what happened. I mean, you kind of roll the dice that you're creating a structure for a film that will work. And this was a big roll of the dice, but it ended up, the work of Lisa's work was seen in Koriyama's work that she did. And, Sophia Wallace's 100 Natural Laws are the structure for the film, right? They provide the emotional punctuation to a lot of the scenes. So it was important to me that those 5 women be in the film as well. I didn't necessarily want 9 people in a film, but it worked, right? It worked okay.
It sure did. It definitely did. Lisa, how did you see your work fitting in with the film, and what messages from the film really resonated with you?
What Maria said earlier about how it's amazing how far we haven't come in many years, and so I feel in some ways it's amazing that that we know as much as we know scientifically, and the culture is way behind, and a part of it is just bringing what at least researchers have made some advances on, trying to bring it to a broader audience, to sort of, it's like the research hasn't trickled down. We're still in a bit of the dark ages. And so that I feel is, why I feel good about, being involved in something like this, because it doesn't help very much if researchers are able to make progress and there's a sort of feminist science that moves us forward on this, if people who in their everyday lives are still not benefiting from any of this knowledge and are still sort of stuck in an ideology about sexuality that is more from the 1900s than the 2000s and onwards. So that's what I think is really the message of the film, is to sort of bring awareness up, and forward into the future.
And that's one of the things that struck me about the women's messages in the film. They were filled with optimism, and I couldn't wait to talk to both of you about that. They said that we're in the middle of a sexual revolution, and the time for being racist, sexist, homophobic, it's over. That's done. Women are experiencing pleasure like never before. And I was wishing that was the case, and I was grateful those women felt that way, but I hadn't seen that resonating in the larger culture to the same degree that some of the people in the film did. So I wondered with both of you, do you see that this right now we're in some kind of a sexual revolution?
I think to some extent, yes, but I think that there's 2 different issues. There is, there's the embrace and the celebration of pleasure, but then the backlash is always about guilt and shame. And I feel like there's a lot of women who are like, yeah, yay for pleasure. And then the culture is so ready to slap them back down with guilt and shame. And I think that guilt and shame and the kind of socialization that women are still exposed to, that makes them feel bad about their bodies, that makes them feel that if they are assaulted, it's their fault. That really hasn't changed. And so I worry that there's I do think that there's a positive movement around women's sexual empowerment, but I think that we're being naive if we think our own years of socialization about guilt and shame can be undone with a snap of a finger. It's amazing how easily it comes back. I've talked to many women who were in the midst of some relationship that was really, really great, and they were feeling all sexually empowered, and then something happens and the partner makes them feel bad about what they want. And it's amazing how quickly that guilt and shame comes in to shut things down. And so I feel like, in addition to a movement that is for women's sexual empowerment and pleasure, we also need to dismantle the ongoing shaming of women and the rape culture that still places women in a position of feeling that they're always at risk when they embrace their sexuality, that at any moment things can go wrong and it was their fault. So I feel like those things have to happen in tandem.
And I think I would add, for me, I know I dealt with a lot of pretty serious issues in the film, and because I believe that they're connected to women not knowing about their pleasure or their bodies. That's a purposeful intent. But I also think I think it's a power game, and the stakes are very high. And so as women become knowledgeable about their own bodies and their pleasure and have agency over that, that changes the balance of power. And if you can't shame us anymore, then what control do you have over our behavior? Maybe none. And I think there is an increasing desire, and let's hope it stops after November 3rd, to control the bodies of women. And not just women, anybody who's not a white heterosexual man, right? So it's the other from the white heterosexual man, and we are all lumped in one big category. And so I think this is ultimately, not really a film about sex or pleasure. It's a film about power, and power is easily taken when the truth is replaced with a lie. And so for me, that's really what the film is about, and why at times I didn't understand a lot of people were so afraid of it, broadcasters, because they thought it was this film that was sort of pornographic because it was about women's pleasure, when in reality it's a film about how you control people and have power over their lives.
Yeah, I definitely got that, and the way you connected those dots and built to the crescendo through the film really impressed upon me that this is a lot more serious than not just about the clitoris, but I mean, it means so much more. And of course, it starts with putting the clitoris in the sex ed books. And you also talk about parenting in the film, and I'm thinking it starts with us and our families. And Maria, you mentioned you have a daughter. So what do we wish all the parents knew right now? I was making mental notes about all the things I want to discuss with my 10-year-old. What are you hoping people who are parents will take away from this film and talk about with their kids as they age?
I'll speak first, and then I know Lisa has a lot more thoughtful things to say. When I met Sophia Wallace in 2012, I was 56 years old or something, whatever I was, and she showed me a picture of what my clitoris looked like, or the clitoris looked like. I was shocked that I didn't know that I had this internal organ in my body. And then I felt really sad, because I have a great relationship with both my children. I have a son and a daughter, but I was really sad that I hadn't spoken to my daughter about this. I think she was by then a freshman in college or something. And because I was a pretty with it woman, but I hadn't, right? That conversation had been absent completely, because of course it had been absent from my life as well. So my kids are good sports. I immediately started talking to both of them about the clitoris, my son and my daughter. And that they just had to put up with it, right? And my son would joke that he was the only one of his friends whose mother routinely spoke to him about the clitoris. And I remember saying, he asked me once, look, Mom, what is the big deal? And I said, imagine you weren't taught about your penis in sex education. Imagine that. And he said, oh, you're right. Right? So here we have men taught all about their bodies and women left in the dark. So I would hope, and I think Lisa again can speak better to this than me, I would hope that the film would give parents, mothers, even fathers, a language to at least begin a conversation. Because it's a win-win for everybody. I don't think men want to have the burden of trying to figure, if they're, heterosexual men don't want to have the burden of trying to figure out what their partner's bodies want. They want to be told. Well, how would a woman know if she doesn't even know her own body? How would she even feel empowered to speak up? And I think that's what has to happen. We have to feel entitled to say, move your finger a little, like that much to the left, and it'll be a whole lot better. But we don't do that.
Yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, it starts, I think, with having children be comfortable exploring their own bodies. And there's a lot of shame around children's sexuality and children's pleasure. And so when a young girl even, explores her body at all, we're embarrassed and, don't do that. And we have a culture that sort of allows self-exploration for boys more than for girls. And so I think it's not so surprising that girls end up feeling sort of alienated from their bodies because they haven't had the same freedom to explore. And also, I think, the penis is a convenient organ. When it gets aroused, it's easy to see. And boys can link up what's happening in their body and what's happening in their minds very easily because they see and feel a direct connection. For girls, it's not as evident, and it's not as, because the clitoris doesn't, emerge from the body in a way that is observable like the penis when it's aroused. Girls don't have as easy access to that process of linking up what's happening in my mind and what's happening in my body. And so I think that contributes to the fact that girls need more explicit discussion of it because they're not getting as much of that obvious feedback visually in terms of what's happening, unless they're going to sit down with a mirror. And that's not going to happen. So I think that is what makes education more important, because boys will figure out a lot of things on their own because it's just easier when you have a larger, organ that extrudes from the body. So that puts the onus on educators to really openly talk about these things and to actively encourage children to touch themselves and enjoy themselves. And that pleasure is a wonderful gift that we've all been given in our bodies, and that it belongs to us. And it's our right to enjoy it and to, celebrate it.
Yeah. And the fear-based messages we get about danger and the rigid boxes of information that actually isn't even accurate is harmful and damaging for all kids as they grow up, and in particular for people who don't fit into those neat, rigid boxes. And I was thinking about some of the things you said about queer women in the film, Lisa. And is the future emancipation happening among those who don't identify with the rigid boxes, as some of the people in the film said?
I actually think in many ways queer people are ahead of the game on a lot of this, because heterosexuals sort of, grow up never, you don't ever have to question anything about your sexuality if you don't want to, because the culture is ready and willing to tell you what you think and what you feel and what you want. So any queer person who begins the process of saying, what do I actually want? Like, what is it that turns me on? Asking that question is sort of what we would like everyone in the culture to do. It's just that queer people have to, because they figure out that what they're wanting doesn't fit with what the culture wants them to want. But in an ideal world, everyone would go through a questioning and coming out process just to figure out anything about what they desire or and what they feel, and to actually go through an honest process of interrogating their own sexual subjectivity. That's something that queer people always have to do. I think a lot of heterosexual people would benefit from going through that process themselves. So I do think in many ways, queer women in particular are a little bit ahead of the game in terms of embracing their own pleasure and knowing what they want and being able to say, you know, this is what makes me feel good, and this is, you know, the best way for me to achieve that with a partner.
Yeah. And those messages and voices in the film were really inspirational. And I hope everybody who's watching or watched the film tonight takes that away as some homework to figure out what works for me, what's the site of my pleasure, and what do I need, and how do I ask for it, etc. So I could talk to you both all night about this film, but let me just ask, Maria, what do you hope is next for the film? Where is it going?
So the film right now is screening in a lot of digital festivals and all over the place, internationally as well as in the US. And so that's really great because it gives me an opportunity to reach a broad audience. And we are reaching a broad audience. I'll get emails from people from Poland, from Israel. People are 16 years old and they're 80-year-old men. And I got an email from an 80-year-old man who said, I've been married for 50 years to a woman. I love her very much. I thought I learned about women. I guess I didn't. I really like your new kind of feminism. And so that's great, right? So we're hoping that continues to, the film continues to play in festivals. Ultimately, I need to sell it to a platform like a Hulu or Netflix or Amazon so that it gets out there. And then we also have a really wonderful aspirational engagement campaign, which will get the film into colleges and community groups and book groups and in front of, I'd love it to get into high schools, just about everybody. So that I joke, it's not really a joke, but I say that I'll consider myself successful the day every young woman entering her freshman year of high school knows what her clitoris looks like, where it is, and what it's for. It's a big goal.
I think that's a goal that I've said, and maybe you've said too, Lisa. That's a common for us.
That's great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, I hope everyone who's watching the film goes and finds one if they haven't found it yet. And thank you so much for coming and talking about this and making this really important film. I can't wait for my students to see it, my daughter, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.